Everyone, Kathy the Vegan Prepper here, and today I am taking on the project of revamping and kind of reorganizing some of my bulk food storage to hopefully make it a little neater, get some extra stuff that's on the ground onto the shelves. Hopefully that is the goal, to have everything kind of contained within these shelves, and just to sort of look at what I'm looking at as I am kind of coming up with solutions for the organization process. Storing food is so much more than just about putting it in Mylar bags, you know, and sticking it on a shelf. There's actually a lot of logistics, kind of Tetrising, moving of pieces around, things to think about when you are looking at food storage. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and look at kind of my thought process and a little bit of my methodology, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. Vegan prepper. Vegan prepper. Here is an uncensored view of the before. So food storage always has a bit of an ebb and a flow to it. You'll have some times where everything just fits beautifully in the storage that you have already set up. And then there will be other times when you have a whole bunch of extra stuff around. If you are like us and you buy in bulk and you're constantly replacing, like I don't even really consider the majority of this to be my prepper stash. This is just like our regular food stash because we buy so much in bulk, we cook from scratch. This is just what it looks like when you buy your ingredients in bulk. And so you'll have an ebb and a flow, like I said, where sometimes everything fits and sometimes everything does not. But the first job that I always give myself when I am looking at my space is I am thinking, where can I find more space so that I can get stuff that's on the ground back onto the shelves? Where can I find that? And so my first focus area is actually going to be over on my jars of dehydrated goods. So here you can see already in the front there are jars that I can consolidate. You know, I can make smaller jars of these items, for instance. There's jars in here I know that I can pour into each other. I know that I have celery jars where I haven't always been grabbing the same jar of celery. I can combine those and just create more space in this space so that we can put some more things. There's jars back here, storage jars, like my cacao powder jar, which is nearly empty. I have cacao powder right here. Maybe I can empty this bag into that jar. Like, I don't know. So stuff like that, I'm going to go ahead and take care of some of those little jobs and see how much space can I create in this space. And I'll come back once I'm done with that. A quick tip I thought I would share. I do store my dehydrated goods pretty much exclusively in ball jars that have the measurements on the side. And it's handy for so many reasons. It comes up in so many ways, but the way that it's coming up right now for me is that I can see very clearly without having to estimate or eyeball whether or not a certain size jar will fit what's left in a jar. So like for instance here where it's a little close, it's actually above the 1 cup, so I couldn't get myself a half pint jar to store this, but a pint jar will fit just fine, and I can see that on the side rather than staring at something like this and being like, gosh, I wonder if that would fit in, you know, a jar this size. Like, I wonder if it would fit, you know, and trying it and then having it not work. I just know it won't. It's too much. So anyway, thought I would go ahead and quickly share that with you guys. Another thing is, as I am consolidating, I'm actually sort of just using lids that I already have out. That way I'm not having to have a whole bunch of stuff to wash if I don't have to. I'm a little lax with just these dehydrated dry goods, kind of depending on what the jar is or what the item is. Like for instance, my jar over here that had onions in it, I will likely not be using for another item just because onions are obviously, they smell so strongly and they leave their scent and their taste behind. But for other things, you know, like there were, I don't know, like the carrots or whatever, like I could use that for a different item and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. And so I sort of just save myself dishes and I mix between the jars and move the lids around so that I don't have to, like I said, I don't have to wash too much. I have already opened up so much space just doing that. I'm very excited. I wanted to share one more thing. If I had to do this again, like build my jar collection again, I would go for wide mouth over the regular mouth. I stocked up on most of my jars intending to do a lot of canning, which I have just discovered is not my thing. I do not like canning. I much prefer dehydration for many reasons that I've said in many other videos, but I don't have to like rehash all of that right now. But if I had my choice again, I would choose all wide mouth jars, and it's primarily because of how much more easily they stack on each other. So with the regular mouth jars, if you have a jar on top of another jar, it's not stable, it sort of slips around. But if you have a wide mouth jar, and even if you're using a bigger, now it doesn't work for the quart size. The quart size will not stack on the wide mouth jar either. It behaves very much like this. But like anything else, pints, see like how that just slips right in there and it's stable. Pints will stack on each other. Pints will stack on top of quarts. Other jars will stack on top of almost any size. And so, like I said, the only one that you can't really stack are the quarts, but everything else will fit. The exception will be for things like the regular mouth half pint jar is very skinny at the bottom. And so it stacks easily into the ring on the regular mouth jar. But yeah, like I said, if I could do it again, I would rebuild my stash and I would do all wide mouth jars. The other thing, and I'm trying to see if I even have a wide mouth pint over here. I don't. Let me get a wide mouth pint. Let me show you something else. So there is a good 1/4 inch difference in height between the regular mouth jar and the wide mouth jar. So it's something to really keep in mind in case you didn't realize or know. That was something that I learned after the fact, after I had already built a nice little shelving system that perfectly fit wide mouth pint jars. And then I went to try to put some of my pints away, but they were regular mouth pints and they didn't fit. So I like to point that out sometimes in case people are not aware that there is a height difference, and keep that in mind. If you are trying, you're more, you're more put together than I am, and you're building like a really big, nice, built-in shelving system or something to make absolutely sure that if you're going to switch back and forth between these jars, that both types of jars will fit on your shelves. And for anybody who is curious now, there is also a height difference between the regular mouth quart and the wide mouth quart, although to my eye, it doesn't seem as dramatic as the difference between the regular mouth pint and the wide mouth pint. Speaking of jar choices, I'm also going to start slowly building up my selection of the Azure Standard half-gallon storage jars. Basically, I will say I dislike the lids. I definitely prefer the lids on the ball style jars better. But what I love the most, specifically about the half-gallon size, is that though technically the footprint is slightly larger, like it's wider than the half-gallon ball jar, I feel like you can end up fitting so much more into a space because of how easily they stack. And so they stack beautifully, they stack securely, and then if you have a shelf that is tall enough to fit 2 of them stacked, I feel like you can just fit so much more in that shelf than if you were to stick with only the ball jars. I'm thinking of this too because I don't have another half-gallon jar ready for my shredded coconut over here, and so I think I'm just going to order half-gallon jars off of Azure and sort of start moving that way rather than this way. Though I will say this is where I will focus that decision primarily on ingredients, things like shredded coconut or like cacao powder and the vegan white chocolate chips that we have from Azure, rather than my dehydrated goods. I still would rather put my dehydrated foods specifically in a half-gallon jar, especially if I were to vacuum seal them. I just trust the seal more. I think it's a better seal than this jar. But for stuff that I'm going through constantly, I will probably switch over to mostly these jars. Oh, it's fine. I don't need a funnel. Now it's time to talk a little bit about labeling and jars and whether or not you even choose to use jars. So I personally love tape labels, and this has just come up. I just switched the cacao powder from a half-gallon jar to a full-gallon jar. And I used the old tape label, just peeled it right off and stuck it right on this jar. And so it's super handy. I feel like even though you're using tape, it's a bit of a low waste way to do it because you can reuse the label so many times depending on, whatever. And I've never had any issues with them falling off. I have tape labels that are very old. I have a whole video on the channel all about my tape labeling and why I like it, so I can link that down below for anybody who's interested. But basically, I turned the old cacao powder jar into a Vital Wheat gluten jar, and now I just need to label it. So I have my label already ready here. I know some people don't really like the uneven edges of the tape labels, and so I thought that I would show you a trick for getting a straighter edge. And so we're going to see if I can do it like up here with the camera. That basically what you would do is take some kind of ruler or straight edge, and then when you go to rip off your label, you just hold it down firmly and you rip, and then you'll end up with a perfectly straight edge very easily. So for anybody who doesn't really like the messiness of the, you know, the labels kind of having uneven sides, that's great for you. So here is just like the regular edge, which I like this. I kind of like the, even though it's painter's tape, essentially, I like the kind of the kind of organic feel of this tear. But if you really don't like that, then go ahead and do it that way with the ruler, and you'll end up with this perfectly straight edge, and that might make you happier. So I just use the blue, because I know in my video there were a lot of people who were like, I would not use the blue because it's like, it's too bold or whatever. Obviously, you can see blue everywhere, all over my buckets, but this is the roll of tape that I stole from my husband, and it was blue. So that's what I'm using. But if you would rather have something that's even a little bit more aesthetic, you use labels or whatever. It's not necessarily true that you have to go through removing labels every single time. What I do pretty much every single time, because this used to hold some almonds, obviously, now it's holding shredded coconut. So I just have a new label, and you know what, I'm not gonna do this. I'm gonna do this down here so that I can see it. And if you just get it right on, just right on the edge, then you just put it right there, and you have a new label right on top of the old one. And you can't, you know, if I had done the whole thing looking at it, because I'm on camera, I'm not quite doing it as precisely as I normally would, you wouldn't even be able to see the old label. You can see a teeny tiny bit of it right here. But if you do it carefully, you won't even be able to see the old label, and now you just still have kind of a more aesthetic label, and you didn't have to go through any trouble getting the old one off. So those are my tips on some labeling. One of the things too that I did here, I don't know if you notice, is because the best by date, and shredded coconut is one of those things that does not stay good for really like forever on a shelf. I went ahead and put the best by date on the label that I got from the bag. And so that also begs the question of whether or not you even want to use jars to store some of this stuff. And so there's also kind of pluses and minuses to that, kind of depending upon your situation. So if you're like me and you have a lot of your ingredient storage separate from your kitchen, and you're having to carry ingredients to your kitchen, honestly, especially if your setup is something like you have a lot of stuff in the basement that you might have to carry up, or it's like really far away, then bags might honestly be the way to go, because it's a lot easier to have a handful of bags of things to take with you somewhere than it is to take the jars. That is definitely a disadvantage of the jars, especially if you're going to need to move them in order to use them, is you have to make multiple trips carrying all of your jars. However, I tend to still prefer jars because I'm so visual. I don't like seeing a shelf of bags and then to go to something that, especially if I don't use it as often, like say a shredded coconut, to open the bag only to find out I don't have enough for what I need it for, because I can't see visually from the outside of the bag how much is in there. And this is only for me, the clear storage jars are only for the things that I am putting up on my shelf that I'm intending to use within a very short amount of time, like within only a year or two, right? Kind of max. We're talking about stuff that's going to be cycled through really quickly. And so I tend to prefer jars so that I can see, because a lot of times too, if I don't know what I want to make or whatever, I'll just like go over to my shelf and sort of look around and see, is there anything that I haven't used in a while or anything I need to use up? And I will make my choices of what I'm cooking or making or baking or whatever for that day based upon something that I need to use on my shelf. I think a lot of people do stuff like that too. So it's much easier when you have a jar. Another question though becomes, this is scintillating, right? Like, are you guys just so glad that you tuned in? Another thing to consider though is, do I use a jar that is large enough to hold the amount that I purchase, so that I have a large jar of something sitting on the shelf all of the time, which is a disadvantage when it's getting towards the empty. So like if that huge jar of cacao powder only has like an inch of cacao powder left in it, it's still this huge jar on my shelf. Plus I might have an extra cacao powder somewhere, right, ready to refill that jar. And so the question is, do you want that large jar, or do you go with something maybe a little smaller with a refill bag in kind of in the background? And like why? So because this takes up a little less room, but then you have to find a storage place for your refills. So I don't know, but the advantage of that is, especially for something like, say, the Vital Wheat Gluten, for me, it's not something that I use up very fast. It's not something I use very often. So I don't necessarily want to devote a huge amount of my shelf space to Vital Wheat Gluten. And I'll show you I'll show you what I do with my refill bags in a second. At least some of them. And so the other disadvantage is too, though, you can empty the jar and then not remember that you have a refill and order another thing when you didn't need to, which I have done before. So for me, the answer to that question is, do I have a refill bag, or do I just have a jar that's big enough for the bag that I buy? The answer to that question ends up being how often I use the thing. So like for cacao, which we use a lot of in the house, for various baked goods, hot chocolate, all that stuff, I will just have the larger jar because it's less annoying, because I don't have to refill it as often. But for something I use less, I don't mind refilling it more, because I can just do the refills as needed, which is not very often. So that's another question you have to kind of answer when you're going through all this stuff. And I can't believe how much time I've already taken just on kind of these simple things, but it's amazing once I start really getting into it. I start realizing all of the considerations and all of the decisions that I'm making, and I want to share this with you guys, not to be obtuse and not to be long-winded, but because I've never seen another channel talking about these kind of nitty-gritty things in this food storage like that I go into, because it's a lot of decisions to make. There's a lot of questions to answer, and honestly, you just kind of don't know until you get into it, and then you know. So anyway, that's what we're doing. So I am still working on that one shelf. Okay. This is how much space has been freed up on my shelf. I'm so excited, even with going ahead and putting in all of the sauces that were here. They are now over here. And so just from consolidating jars and organizing, this is how much space I freed up. So I'm very, very thrilled about that. And yeah, so now I'm basically going to go ahead. I did find like my little condiment jar and decided to go ahead and rotate through. We just ran out of ketchup, so I'm going to take all of the ketchups that were in that jar that were not puffed up suspiciously. I don't know if this means it's bad or not, but if it puffs up like a balloon, I don't use it. I like for them to stay flat, kind of like they're supposed to. But we will go ahead and go through those. And so now I've even saved myself from needing to go grab ketchup. I am just generally chuffed at how well this is going. And so I found chocolate mini muffin mix, chocolate chip mini muffin mix on the shelf as well. I'm going to go ahead and make those. And yeah, I'm just very happy. So I'm going to go ahead and keep kind of working stuff into this shelf. And yeah, I'm feeling very happy right now. Okay, so I mentioned that these 3 totes also hold stuff that I'm working through. This is my pasta tote. So in the before shot, there were actually a whole bunch of vegan macaroni and cheeses that were in front over here. And I went ahead and put all of those into this tote because this is kind of my pasta tote. So this typically holds my lasagna noodles, tinkyata lasagna noodles, and other pastas and all of that I just grab there in this tote, so I don't have those sitting around. Any of the pasta that I have that is not a bulk purchase, because I do actually have separate bulk buckets for pastas, those non-bulk purchases go in here. And then these 2 end up typically being the place where I store my refill bags. So like this bag, now that I've made a jar for the Vital Wheat Gluten, the leftover is going to go into one of these totes. I also will store my extra sun butters inside of one of these totes. And so I just have to get in there and see what's in there and make space for putting these things away, these extra things, the sun butter containers, and likely my chocolate chips. I chose not to make a jar for the chocolate chips. And here's just another thing, like it just ends up depending on what you prefer and what your family is like. But if I had a nice, clear, beautiful jar of chocolate chips sitting on my shelf, they would start disappearing. And it wouldn't necessarily only be my family that was to blame. Like, I would see them and I would want to eat them. And somehow, like, the picture doesn't trigger me as much as seeing the jar of chocolate chips. So I do definitely choose to continue leaving things like chocolate chips and sweet treats inside of bags where I can't really see them, like in the flesh, then I don't want them as much, because especially the ones from Azure are very expensive and we like to save these for actual baking needs. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to continue. So here's inside of one of the totes, and actually I have some coconut milk powder here, which is, I'm actually going to pull this and I'm going to go refill a coconut milk powder in my pantry. That is one of the examples actually of a time that I ordered something I didn't need. I ordered an extra coconut milk powder because I forgot I had another bag in here, but I can use those up. I can go ahead and use that up now. I have some organic raisins. I get these from Costco. I'm going to go ahead and refill a jar of raisins in my pantry as well. So I'm pulling that out. And I had this big bag of transitional almond meal flour. The transitional means that it's not organic yet. Everything they're doing in practice is organic, but they don't have the certification yet. And so I have the transitional almond meal flour, but this is how much space I have in this tote for throwing in extra bags of things, which is, exciting. And so I'm going to go ahead and just continue the organization process. But just so you know, this is kind of what the inside of one of the totes looks like with the extra bags of things. And then it is really important to go through them every now and then. And a lot of times you can end up making more space in your totes if you decide to do something like this, just by refilling the stuff that you have in your pantry. So stuff in the pantry is getting refills. And I actually just refilled the pistachios from the bag I had in here. So now I need to get more pistachios at Costco. But my husband will be very excited that the pistachios are refilled. And so anyway, yeah, you just kind of keep cycling in and out. And that is exactly what it's supposed to be. But it does require at least a little bit of hands-on work on our part to make that happen. There's enough space on the bottom shelf over here to be able to put some of these giant Mylar bags, where we're just basically putting our bulk goods into a giant Mylar bag with oxygen absorbers in order to make sure that there are no bug eggs that will ever hatch in the food. So as long as the dry goods stay in an oxygen-free environment for at least 14 days, bug eggs will be killed off and you will not end up with bug infestations in your food, at least not that come from the food. You still could potentially end up with it, obviously, if bugs get into it, if it's not stored well once you get it out. But this is to prevent stuff from hatching inside of your food. And so I'm trying to get some of those bags put away. All of the bags like that you see around my storage area, like up there or whatever, these are not really long-term storage. These are the spares for my buckets, so that once the bucket is empty, I can pour some in. So realizing I don't have enough room for these over there, I thought, let me check the buckets and see if there's one that I could go ahead and refill. And my mung bean bucket is almost completely empty. So I will dump the mung beans that are in the bucket into another container and then pour these mung beans into that bucket, then pour the old mung beans back on top. And that is how I refill my buckets. In fact, I'm going to do that for any of the bags that I find. I'm going to go ahead and take care of that job. It's a big job. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just get on it because we're doing this for real. We're going to do it right. So I know it's been at least 2 weeks because the date is right on the back. It's July 2023. So basically what I'll go ahead and do is just cut off this top. We'll actually likely be able to seal it one more time above the zipper before we have to cut off the zipper. But these 5-gallon Mylar bags are so huge. They really fit much more than 25 pounds. You can reuse them several times to do this treatment to make sure that the bugs don't get into your food. I just find it easier to do it like this than to do smaller bags every single time. Although the smaller bags are definitely easier to store and Tetris into your totes for more long-term storage. But yeah, this is how I run the refills of my big buckets, which is, again, this is the part I don't even really consider my prepper stash. This is just our food. This is like what we normally go through. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this bucket. Here is 25 pounds of mung beans now in a 5-gallon bucket. So oftentimes a 5-gallon bucket will actually fit more than 25 pounds of food. depending on what it is. A 5-gallon bucket will not fit 25 pounds of oats. Oats are too fluffy. They take up way more room than one 5-gallon bucket, but just so you know, you could store more than 25 pounds in here. And there's what was left of the bucket before. Just put that right on top and go ahead and have this to dip into for my family. And I will go ahead and also change the date on the front to October 2023, because that's where we are now. And then that also lets me know that it takes us, I guess, about 2 years to go through 25-pound bags, a 25-pound bag of mung beans, and that also helps me to inform my purchasing choices. So the date on the front is not so much about expiration, it's about also letting me know how often I need to purchase the thing that is in the bucket. So anyway, this is how this works. I just add another piece of tape with the new current date to keep track of how much we use in that period of time. Right, my next bit of project is back here with my infamous tomato paste stash. So this is what's left of my stash currently, and so I'm going to come through here and organize it by expiration date. And the oldest or the soonest to expire will be on the left, and they will move to the right to the newer ones. And then as I replace the stash and I begin to build it back up so that I constantly have kind of a rotating supply of about a year's worth of tomato paste, the newer stuff can all just file in on the right side, and then I hopefully don't really have to do this again. But as I was purchasing, I was not being very careful about how I put it away, and that was, you know, silly of me, but I'm going to go ahead and take care of that now. Right, here is all of that. I've labeled them as well, so it looks like the soonest to expire are April of 2024. It's October 2023 as I'm filming this video, so I definitely have time to get through all of this. The latest to expire will be September of 2024. This is less than a year's supply, so I will get through this tomato paste by then, and I'll start stacking new ones up on the right and sort of sliding them over as necessary. And yeah, just getting my sparkling waters put away too. We were at Costco last time. These were on sale. They were about $3 off, and so we got 2 of them instead of only 1. So I put them here. This is their spot. And yeah, I'm thinking in this spot, I might go ahead and stick these bags while I'm waiting to go ahead and get them set up with their big Mylar bag and their oxygen absorber. And also on the floor, I just have so many different random things to take care of, is my potatoes, my potato harvest. I got a very small potato harvest. We did eat some of them, but this is kind of what's left of the small potato harvest I did from some sprouted potatoes that I had from Azure Standard, and I just grew them and they grew more potatoes for me. So I decided to save these. I want to plant out an entire bed of potatoes as soon as it's time to plant more potatoes, and then just multiply this back to myself. So that will be either this month or next month. So these guys, I'm trying to figure out exactly where they should go. I shouldn't put them outside because it's kind of too hot. So I think I actually may just go ahead and let them sit on top of the sparkling water. And then that way too, I won't forget about them. I had considered putting them up on top of one of these, like slipping it up, but I'm afraid I'll forget about it. So this way they'll be in my way, but I'm going to leave them to be in my way on purpose so that I make sure that I actually take care of these this year. I'm very excited. That's one of my next outdoor projects, is to set up another bed and fill it with potatoes. I'm very excited about that. Oh my gosh, what a ride. So I am going to go ahead and close up shop for tonight. I didn't get 100% of everything done. I was also really hoping to get through and organize these top shelves, and I didn't really touch those very much. But getting all of the rest of it done is such a huge help that I am very satisfied with my day of work. This has been pretty much an all-day project. Granted, I do have my daughter home today, and so I was stopping, we read a story, we hung out, you know, making food, and all of those interruptions that children bring, but it's great. I would just come back in here and get started again. So one of the bags of rice on the floor, I ended up doing the same treatment as I did with the mung beans. I poured this is my rice bucket right here. I poured what was in there into that big stainless steel bowl, filled the bucket with rice, and then poured the old stuff right back on top so that will, essentially get used first. I know some mixing will occur, but essentially the older stuff will get used first. I did want to have one last chat with you guys about this shelf up here in particular. So we're going to go ahead and go back over there and talk about that. But overall, here is the after. I'm very happy. Again, this is so wonderful. It will be so wonderful to be able to walk again directly up to the bucket and grab it without having to sort of stand back and bend, which is really a terrible position to put your back into. So yes, I'm so happy. Clear floors, it's my favorite. Clear floors, clear surfaces, it's my absolute favorite. I did really stuff this shelf as full as I possibly could, which is not necessarily something that I would 100% recommend, generally speaking, but let me talk to you about why I did and why I believe it works sometimes and why it wouldn't work other times. So the reason I believe that it does work in this case is that I have several items, mainly these canned goods over here. There's several canned goods kind of into the back, like a little box of Triscuits here that's going to disappear pretty fast. Agave, we've got the various sauces that I've already shown you guys in this video. All of that will begin to disappear as we begin to use it. So that will create more space on the shelf again, like the flour too. That stuff is going to kind of begin to go away, which will create some wiggle room on the shelf to be able to move jars back and forth and get to some of the things that we really need to get. The other reason is my setup here. I do have this nice shelf space down here, which ideally I do keep completely clear because I do get into these totes, but it also allows me to say I need to grab my walnuts. I can grab this and put this down here, and I have a way of accessing the items that I need to access without having to move things around on the shelf itself. And so it's not too much of a difficulty for me to do that. And like I said, because certain items are going to be disappearing and creating space, that's one thing. Being able to move stuff is another thing. I would not want to pack this shelf completely full if the shelf were full of just jars of things, because as these are getting emptied, the jar doesn't go away. The jar remains even as the quantity of the item decreases. The shelf space that it takes up does not decrease. And so if, again, the entire shelf were full of just jars, I would not want to pack it in this much. I would build some wiggle room. I'd leave a little bit of space in between the rows. And actually, even though you can't see it, I do that anyway. There is actually a bit of space, probably a good 1/4 inch at least to a 1/2 inch of space, so that I can, when I need to pull these out, say I need to grab, one of my jars that's further back, I can reach in and grab and pull, and I have the space to do that. So I haven't packed it probably as much as it looks like it's packed. But anyway, I just thought I would bring that up. It's really important to build just a little bit of space into your shelves in order to keep them functional. Or if you are just really trying as hard as you can to get a bunch of stuff off the floor and get your stuff into your space, knowing that you have space that will be opening up in the future is also totally fine as far as building space. It's future space in your shelf. Because this is, as I say many times, and I think I've said many times, even just in this organizational video, this food storage thing is an ebb and a flow. It's cycling in and out. I'm not going to always have, 20 some odd cans of coconut milk. I'm not always going to have as many cans of pumpkin as I have over here. I am going to use up quite a few of those cans of pumpkin over this next season between pumpkin breads and pumpkin pies and all of that. So anyway, those are just some thoughts that I wanted to share as I was doing my reorganization. hopefully you ended up enjoying that. You got something good out of it. It is definitely not 100% perfect. It's definitely not 100% done, but I think that there's also something to be said for the fact that honestly, this is never 100% perfect. This is never 100% done. When you begin to purchase food in bulk quantities, you start cooking from scratch for your family, when you start stocking up on sales and things like that, there is a constantly rotating and changing stock of items in your food storage, and basically you end up periodically solving the same problem over and over and over and over again. How do I make more space to fit stuff in, Tetris stuff in such a way that it ends up working for you? And then as stuff disappears, other things come in that are different shapes and different sizes. They require different storage. And so you have to kind of revamp and reorganize a little bit of what you've been doing. Although a lot of the stuff ends up working the same over time. The longer I do this, the more adept I become at solving these problems, that same problem over and over again. But I kind of have solutions that I've already used in the past that end up still working, of course. And so hopefully some of that experience will help you a little bit if you are just getting started and feeling a bit overwhelmed by this process, because it is a process. And so it's definitely a skill that a lot of us need to learn, because this is not something that is celebrated very much in modern society. Most of us have outsourced our food storage to the grocery store, and so this is about bringing some of it back in. But anyway, as always, I hope the rest of your day is good and your life stays wonderful. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments any tips or tricks that you have for any of what you saw in the video today, or any ideas or suggestions, ways that you think I could make things better. I'm always open to that. And yeah, I guess we'll just go ahead and see you in the next one. Bye.